The Grand Hall of the Galactic Senate stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and floating platforms. Thousands of species gathered here, representatives from civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel before humanity had invented the wheel. The air shimmered with translation fields, allowing every creature to understand every other in real time. Above them all, the massive viewing screens displayed the current speaker, magnified so even those in the farthest seats could see clearly. Ambassador Taemin stood at the presentation podium, a simple human in a dark suit among creatures that defied imagination. To his left sat a being made entirely of crystallized light. To his right, a methane-breathing entity floated in a containment sphere. He had practiced his speech for months, refined every word, anticipated every question. Today would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. Honored representatives, Taemin began, his voice steady despite the weight of representing 8 billion souls. Earth brings forward a proposal for mutual cooperation. We offer our scientific knowledge, our cultural diversity, and our commitment to galactic peace. In return, we ask for partnership in defense treaties and access to advanced medical technologies. The presentation continued for 20 minutes. Taemin showed humanity's achievements. The colonies on Mars and Europa, the fusion drives that had carried them to neighboring stars, the vaccines they had developed for diseases that plagued multiple species. He spoke of human art, human philosophy, human determination to reach beyond their small blue world. When he finished, silence filled the chamber for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter started. It began with the Valorian section, a rippling chirp that sounded like metal scraping against glass. The insectoid species found something amusing, their compound eyes gleaming with reflected light. Within moments, the laughter spread through the chamber like wildfire. The crystalline beings chimed in harmonics. The methane breathers vibrated their containment spheres. Even the usually stoic Krellians allowed themselves gurgling sounds of amusement. Taemin stood silent, his presentation still glowing behind him on the screens. His colleague, Ji-woo, sat in the human delegation area, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Another team member, Dong-hyun, stared at his datapad, unable to watch the spectacle. The Valorian prime speaker, Threk Von, activated his own podium. His image replaced Taemin's on the viewing screens, magnified to show every detail of his chitinous face. "Forgive us, little human," Threk Von said, his translator rendering the words with dripping condescension. "But did you truly expect us to be impressed? Your fusion drives are museum pieces. We abandoned that technology 12,000 years ago. Your colonies are barely more than research stations. And your weapons." He paused for effect. "Kinetic projectiles? Chemical explosives? We used such things when we still crawled in mud." Laughter erupted again, louder this time. A Celestine representative rose, her 6 arms, gesturing elegantly. "The human proposal speaks of cultural diversity," she said, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber. "But what culture can truly flourish in such limited lifespans? You live barely a century. We live for millennia. What depth can such brief existences possibly achieve?" More laughter, more agreement. Taemin noticed that a few species remained quiet, smaller civilizations that understood what it meant to be dismissed. But their silence meant nothing against the chorus of mockery. A Krellian admiral activated his speaking rights. "I have reviewed human military capabilities," he announced, his deep voice rumbling through translation fields. "They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no genetic enhancements. They are soft, weak creatures who somehow survived on a death world through pure accident. Tell me, Ambassador Taemin, what exactly do you bring to this galaxy that we should value?" Taemin waited for the translation to complete. He had known this might happen. The diplomatic corps had war-gamed dozens of scenarios, prepared responses for every possible objection, but standing here, under the gaze of thousands of superior beings, all those preparations felt hollow. We bring ourselves, Taemin said simply. Our perspective, our willingness to learn and to share what we know. We bring friendship. The word friendship triggered another wave of laughter. A slug-like creature from the outer reaches actually fell off its platform, its gelatinous body shaking with mirth. The screens showed representatives across the chamber, exchanging amused glances, making comments to their neighbors. The vote was called. The proposal required a simple majority to pass, with abstentions not counted. The results appeared on every screen simultaneously. 847 votes against, 3 votes in favor, 124 abstentions. The 3 favorable votes came from minor species, barely more advanced than humanity itself. The abstentions came from those too polite to laugh but too practical to help. Threkvan's voice boomed across the chamber one final time. The Senate has spoken. The human proposal is rejected. Perhaps in another 10,000 years, little humans, you will have developed something worth our attention. Until then, you may maintain your embassy here and continue to observe how true galactic civilizations operate. We welcome you as students. If not, as equals. The dismissal was complete. The chamber began clearing as representatives moved on to the next item on the agenda. To them, the human proposal had been nothing more than a brief entertainment, a reminder of how far they had come from their own primitive beginnings. Taemin gathered his presentation materials with careful, deliberate movements. Jiwoo joined him at the podium, her face carefully neutral. Taemin, she whispered. What do we do now? He looked around the emptying chamber, at the beings who had laughed at humanity's offering of friendship. He thought of Earth, of the billions who had hoped for acceptance. He thought of the colonies struggling to establish themselves without access to advanced medical technology. He thought of everything humanity had overcome just to reach this point. We thank them for their time, Taemin said quietly. And then we go home. Dong-hyun approached, carrying the rest of their materials. The media channels are requesting comments, he said. The galactic networks want to interview us about the vote. Decline all requests, Taemin instructed. We maintain dignity. We thank the Senate for considering our proposal, express hope for future cooperation, and return to Earth. The 3 humans walked through the crystal corridors toward their embassy quarters. Behind them, the Senate continued its business, already forgetting the brief interruption. Above them, the viewing screens showed debates about mining rights and trade routes, discussions between civilizations that measured their histories in millions of years. Taemin activated his communication device and composed a message to Earth's government. The words came easily, stripped of emotion or accusation. Proposal rejected. Recommend reassessment of galactic engagement strategy. Will await instructions. The response came within hours. It was brief, just 3 words from the Secretary General. Come home, Ambassador. And so they did, leaving behind an embassy that would soon stand empty, though no one in the Senate noticed. Not yet. 3 months had passed since the Senate vote. The human embassy on Centris Prime stood quiet, its windows dark. The diplomatic staff had departed on a transport ship 2 weeks ago. They left behind empty offices, with clean desks and locked storage rooms. No forwarding address was posted. No caretaker remained to answer questions. Across the galaxy, similar scenes repeated themselves. Human consulates closed their doors on 17 different worlds. Trade offices shut down their operations. Scientific outposts transmitted final reports and then went silent. The process happened without announcements or press releases. One day, human representatives attended meetings and conferences. The next day, they were simply gone. Most species barely noticed. Humans had always been peripheral figures in galactic affairs, observers rather than participants. Their absence created no obvious gaps in daily operations. The first person to sense something wrong was He-Jin, a Celestine researcher working at the Biological Survey Station on Taros 6. She specialized in planetary ecology and had collaborated with human scientists for nearly 5 years. The humans brought an interesting perspective to biological studies, often noticing patterns that her people missed. They seemed to have an instinct for seeing connections between different forms of life. Her primary human contact, a biologist named Su Min, had been mapping fungal networks in the planet's massive forest systems. The work was groundbreaking, revealing how the entire forest communicated through underground connections. Su Min had promised to share her completed data set by the end of the month. The deadline passed. No data arrived. Jin sent a message to Su Min's research station. The response came back from an automated system. This facility is no longer in operation. All ongoing projects have been concluded. Thank you for your cooperation. Jin tried Su Min's personal communication line. Disconnected. She checked the human scientific databases where researchers shared their findings. Access denied. The entire network had been shut down, taking decades of accumulated research with it. She contacted other researchers who had worked with humans. They reported the same thing. Projects abandoned. Data withdrawn. Communication lines severed. Every human scientist had simply packed up and left, taking their work with them. The Celestine scientific community filed complaints with the Senate. Valuable research had been lost. Ongoing studies had been interrupted. But the complaints went nowhere. Humans had every right to withdraw their participation if they chose. No laws had been broken. Trade disruptions started appearing in the second month. Ji Wu, now serving as a trade minister for the Celestine Empire, reviewed reports of contract violations. Human suppliers had stopped delivering products across dozens of sectors. Medical compounds, specialized chemicals, agricultural products, all gone. The medical issues became apparent first. Humans had been supplying vaccines and antivirals for several diseases that affected multiple species. The medicines weren't critical for Celestine or Valorian citizens, but frontier colonies relied heavily on them. The compounds worked better than alternatives and cost less to produce. A mining colony on the edge of Krellian space reported an outbreak of Rigel fever. Normally, this was a manageable disease, easily controlled with human-supplied antivirals. But the medicine wasn't available. The colony administration tried to order from Earth directly. No response. They contacted human pharmaceutical companies. All communications bounced back as undeliverable. The fever spread through the colony. 300 workers died before quarantine protocols finally contained the outbreak. The Krellian government demanded an explanation from the human embassy. They discovered the embassy had been closed for 6 weeks. No staff remained to answer questions. Ji Wu found herself investigating the full scope of human economic activity. The numbers surprised her. She had always known humans engaged in trade, but she hadn't realized how extensively they had integrated into galactic commerce. They supplied raw materials to 15 different sectors. They operated shipping routes through dangerous regions where other species found the risk too high. They maintained agriculture stations that produced food, adapted for multiple species' nutritional needs. All of that had stopped. Human cargo ships no longer arrived at scheduled destinations. Their agriculture stations had been evacuated. Their mining operations had been shut down. The economic impact wasn't catastrophic, but it was noticeable. Prices increased for certain goods. Supply chains had to be reorganized. Alternative suppliers had to be found. Military observers noted changes as well. Human patrol vessels had maintained a presence in the outer reaches, the dangerous frontier regions where piracy and smuggling flourished. The humans had volunteered for this duty, claiming they wanted to gain military experience and contribute to galactic security. The Valorian fleet admiral, Threkvon himself, reviewed reports of the human withdrawal. The patrol routes were empty now. No human ships responded to distress calls. No human commanders attended the monthly security briefings. Threkvon felt relieved. The human presence had always embarrassed him. Their primitive weapons and slow ships made the whole operation look less professional. Now his fleet could operate without those awkward reminders of what real military forces used to be. Piracy increased in the third month. Without human patrols filling the gaps, smugglers and raiders found new opportunities. The Valorian fleet tried to compensate, but they were stretched thin. Their advanced ships required significant maintenance and couldn't patrol as frequently as the simpler human vessels had. Minor incidents escalated. A transport convoy was attacked. A research station was raided. Small problems, easily solved once proper forces arrived, but the delayed response times meant more damage and more casualties. The Senate received reports but took no action. These were expected fluctuations in frontier security. The military would adjust. Everything would stabilize. Heijin couldn't let it go. Something about the human withdrawal bothered her. She had known Su Min for years. They had shared meals together, discussed philosophy and art, laughed at each other's jokes, despite coming from worlds billions of kilometers apart. Su Min wouldn't just abandon years of work without explanation. She filed a formal request to visit human space. The request was denied. Earth's government had closed its borders to non-essential travel. No exceptions were being granted. When she tried to send a personal message to Su Min, the communication system reported the recipient address no longer existed. It was as if humanity had simply erased itself from galactic civilization. Not with anger or threats, but with quiet efficiency. They had closed every door, severed every connection, and returned to their own corner of space. Other species began to notice. Questions were raised at Senate meetings. Why had humans withdrawn so completely? Should ambassadors be sent to Earth to inquire about their intentions? Was this some kind of protest? The discussions went nowhere. Some senators argued that humans were simply embarrassed by their rejection and needed time to mature. Others suggested they had realized they weren't ready for galactic society. A few thought the whole situation was amusing, proof that the Senate had been right to reject their proposal. No one considered the possibility that humanity had made a choice, a deliberate decision to walk away from a galaxy that didn't want them. No one imagined they might have made plans, assessed their options, and concluded that independence was better than begging for acceptance. The galaxy continued turning. Trade routes adjusted. Scientific projects found new partners. Military forces redistributed their patrols. Life went on without humanity, just as it had for millions of years before first contact. In the empty human embassy on Centris Prime, dust began to settle on abandoned furniture. The communication systems remained connected to galactic networks, but no one monitored them anymore. Messages accumulated in unread directories. Invitations to conferences went unanswered. Outside, species from across the galaxy passed by the dark building without a second glance. The humans were gone, and soon they would be forgotten entirely. It seemed inevitable, natural even. Why would anyone remember such a brief, unsuccessful attempt at joining galactic civilization? But in quiet corners of the galaxy, a few beings remembered. Heijin kept copies of Su Min's research. Incomplete as it was, Jiwoo maintained records of human trade activities, noting the efficiency and reliability they had demonstrated. A Krellian patrol captain named Minseo remembered serving alongside human vessels, recalled their quick response times and their willingness to take risks others avoided. These memories meant nothing yet. But they would, in time, when the galaxy needed humanity again. These would be the people who understood what had been lost. The first attack came without warning. A mining colony on the edge of Valorian space simply went silent in the middle of a standard shift. Communication systems transmitted static. Emergency beacons activated and then stopped. When the rescue fleet arrived 3 days later, they found ruins. The colony buildings had been torn apart from the inside. Equipment lay scattered and broken. Most disturbing were the biological traces, organic residue that covered every surface. Analysis revealed patterns of aggressive cellular growth, something that consumed and replicated at terrifying speed. The Valorian military command reviewed the data and reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The Skrull swarm had returned. Every civilization kept records of the swarm. They were the nightmare that haunted galactic history. A biological weapon that had escaped control millennia ago. Some ancient civilization had created them as soldiers, engineering organisms that could adapt to any environment and overwhelm any defense. The creators were long dead, consumed by their own creation. The swarm appeared every few centuries, emerging from dark space like a plague. They would attack frontier worlds, consume everything organic, and then vanish back into the void. The last appearance had been 300 years ago, before humanity had even invented radio communication. The second attack came 1 week later. A Celestine agricultural world reported strange organisms landing in meteors. By the time anyone understood what was happening, the organisms had spread across 3 continents. They consumed crops, animals, and eventually the colonists themselves. Orbital bombardment was authorized, but the swarm organisms survived in underground caverns, growing and adapting. The third, fourth, and fifth attacks followed in rapid succession. Different targets, different approaches, but always the same result. The swarm consumed and grew, its bioships spreading like seeds across the galaxy. The Valorian fleet engaged the swarm at the Helios Rift, bringing their most advanced warships to bear. Their plasma cannons could vaporize asteroids. Their energy shields could deflect anything short of a supernova. They were the finest military force in the galaxy, trained and equipped beyond anything humanity could imagine. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Valorian fleet destroyed thousands of swarm organisms in the first hour. Victory seemed certain. Then the swarm adapted. Their bioships began shrugging off plasma fire, their cellular structures rearranging to dissipate energy. Their spore pods learned to penetrate energy shields, slipping through the quantum fields like they weren't there. The Valorian fleet retreated with 70% casualties. Admiral Threkvon watched his ships limp back to friendly space, trailing atmosphere and bodies. The finest weapons in the galaxy had failed against an enemy that simply refused to die. The Krellian Dominion tried chemical warfare next. Their scientists engineered toxins that should have killed anything with carbon-based biology. They deployed the weapons on an infected world, saturating the atmosphere with poison. Initial results looked promising. 98% of swarm organisms died in the first 24 hours. The remaining 2% adapted. Within a week, they had evolved complete immunity. Within 2 weeks, they had actually learned to metabolize the toxins for energy. The world became even more infested than before. Now, with swarm organisms that fed on the very weapons meant to destroy them, panic began spreading through the galactic community. Species that had felt safe for centuries suddenly realized they were vulnerable. The swarm was different this time, more aggressive, spreading faster than historical records suggested. Dozens of worlds were already lost, and more fell every day. Hee-Jin sat in her research facility on Taros 6, reviewing historical data with growing dread. She had been studying the swarm's previous appearances, looking for patterns. Her analysis kept leading to the same troubling conclusion. The swarm's last appearance 300 years ago had ended abruptly. Historical records showed extensive damage, dozens of worlds infected, and then suddenly the swarm retreated. No one knew why. The prevailing theory was that the swarm had simply consumed what it needed and returned to hibernation. But Hee-Jin found something in the old files that didn't match that theory. 300 years ago was when humanity had first achieved faster than light travel. Their early exploration had brought them into contact with the edges of galactic civilization. And in those early days, they had encountered the swarm. She found references in old military reports. Casual mentions of human vessels engaging swarm forces. The reports were dismissive, noting that humans used primitive kinetic weapons and crude chemical explosives. The galactic officers who wrote those reports had barely paid attention to the human activities. But shortly after those encounters, the swarm had retreated. Hee-Jin dug deeper. She found more reports, scattered across different archives. Human ships attacking swarm bioships with missiles loaded with conventional explosives. Human ground forces fighting swarm organisms with bullets and grenades. Human scientists developing specialized toxins and deployment methods. The pieces came together slowly. Energy weapons could be adapted to. Plasma fire was just directed energy, and the swarm learned to dissipate it. Advanced biological warfare used complex compounds that organisms could evolve resistance against. But a bullet was just metal, moving fast. An explosion was just expanding gas and pressure waves. Nuclear weapons released simple, overwhelming force that couldn't be adapted to, only endured. Humans fought with tools that the swarm couldn't easily evolve against, because those tools didn't rely on sophistication. They relied on crude, unstoppable physics. Hyjin realized something else. Humans were persistent. Their military history was full of long, grinding wars. They didn't give up when first attacks failed. They adjusted, learned, and kept fighting with whatever worked. Against an enemy that adapted quickly, that persistence was exactly what was needed. She brought her findings to the Celestine Senate. The presentation took 2 hours, showing correlation after correlation. The data was clear. During the last swarm appearance, human activity had coincided with swarm retreat. Human weapons had been effective where advanced technology failed. The Senate chamber was silent when she finished. No one laughed this time. They understood what she was telling them. They had dismissed humanity as primitive, mocked their simple weapons and crude tactics. Now those same weapons and tactics were exactly what the galaxy needed. A senior senator spoke first. If this analysis is correct, we need human assistance immediately. How do we contact them? End. That's the problem, Hyjin said quietly. We closed every door. We laughed at them. We told them to come back in 10,000 years when they had something to offer, and they left. Then we reopened communication. Another senator declared. We apologize. We explain the situation. Surely they'll understand the stakes. Messages were sent to Earth and human colonies. Emergency channels were activated. Diplomatic vessels rushed toward human space, carrying formal apologies and desperate pleas for help. The galaxy was willing to offer anything: technology sharing agreements, territorial concessions, trade benefits, full voting rights in the Senate. The responses came back slowly. Some were automated rejections. Others were polite acknowledgments that offered no commitment. A few were simple silence. Earth's government finally issued an official statement. We appreciate the Senate's concern regarding current galactic security issues. However, humanity is currently focused on internal development and is not in a position to commit military resources to external conflicts. We wish all civilized species well in their efforts. The message was diplomatic and empty. It said everything and nothing. Humanity had heard the galaxy's cry for help and chosen to remain neutral. They wouldn't help, but they also wouldn't gloat. They would simply stay in their own space and protect their own worlds. The swarm continued spreading. More worlds fell. More fleets were destroyed. The galaxy's finest civilizations, with all their advanced technology and ancient wisdom, were losing a war against an enemy that humanity had once helped defeat. And humanity was nowhere to be found. Safe behind borders they had closed 6 months ago, before anyone even knew the swarm existed. The Senate met in emergency session. Arguments raged across the chamber. Some wanted to demand human assistance, to threaten sanctions or military action. Others urged patience and more diplomatic overtures. A few suggested simply accepting defeat and evacuating vulnerable worlds. Hyjin watched the debates and felt a cold understanding settle over her. The galaxy had taught humanity a lesson about their place in the universe. Now humanity was teaching the galaxy a lesson in return. They had learned it well. The Valorian delegation arrived at Nova Sol on a Tuesday afternoon. The human colony world orbited a yellow star 40 light-years from Earth, home to 2 million colonists. The Valorian ship had broadcast diplomatic credentials from the edge of the system, requesting urgent meeting with human authorities. They had been granted landing permission, but nothing more. No welcoming ceremony awaited them. No diplomatic escort guided them through customs. They processed through immigration like common travelers, their advanced technology and proud history meaning nothing to the bored human customs officer who stamped their entry documents. Admiral Threk Von led the delegation through the colony's main city. He had expected a primitive settlement, barely functional infrastructure. Instead, he found clean streets, efficient public transport, and architecture that blended function with surprising beauty. The buildings rose in graceful curves, covered in gardens that filtered air and collected rainwater. Citizens moved about their business with calm purpose. It was the peace that struck him most. These humans lived without fear, without the constant dread that haunted every other galactic civilization right now. Children played in parks. Couples sat in cafes. Artists painted murals on building walls. The swarm was consuming the galaxy, and these humans simply didn't care. The delegation found Ambassador Tae-min at a university on the city's eastern edge. They were directed to a modest office building where he taught xenolinguistics to undergraduate students. A secretary informed them the professor was finishing a lecture and would see them in 20 minutes. They waited in a small lobby decorated with student artwork. Through an open doorway, they could hear Taemin's voice explaining the grammatical structures of Celestine language. His students asked questions. He answered with patience and humor. It was deeply strange to hear someone discuss galactic civilizations as mere academic subjects. While those same civilizations burned, Taemin finally emerged, wearing casual clothing and carrying a stack of grading. He looked older than Threk Von remembered, with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. The ambassador who had stood before the Senate now looked like a simple teacher, comfortable and content. Admiral Threk Von. Taemin greeted him with a slight bow. And representatives from the Celestine Empire and Krellian Dominion. This is unexpected. Please, come to my office. They crowded into the small space, advanced military officers and seasoned diplomats cramming themselves into furniture meant for student meetings. Taemin offered them tea, which they declined. He poured himself a cup anyway and settled behind his desk. I assume this concerns the swarm, Taemin said calmly. Threk Von leaned forward, his carapace clicking with agitation. 37 worlds have fallen in the last month alone. Billions are dead. Our weapons are useless. Our defenses fail. Everything we try, the swarm adapts and overcomes. I see, Taemin said, sipping his tea. The Celestine representative, a diplomat named Jae-hee, spoke next. Her 6 arms gestured with desperate elegance. Professor Taemin, we understand that humanity feels wronged by the Senate's previous decision. We were arrogant. We were foolish. We failed to see the value you offered. We are here to formally apologize and to beg for your assistance. Your apology is noted, Taemin replied, without emotion. Threk Von pulled up a holographic display showing casualty reports, destroyed fleets, lost worlds. Look at this. Look at what's happening. This isn't about pride anymore. This is about survival. The swarm will consume everything if we don't stop it, including Earth, eventually. Taemin studied the display for a long moment. Your analysis suggests the swarm will reach human space in approximately 4 years if current expansion rates continue. Yes, Threk Von said urgently. Don't you understand? This threatens you too. We need to fight together. Perhaps, Taemin agreed. If the swarm reaches us in 4 years, we will fight. We're quite capable of defending ourselves. The Krellian diplomat, Wonshik, tried a different approach. We're offering full membership in the Senate, not as students or observers, but as equal partners. We'll share all our technology, grant territorial rights, establish trade benefits, name your price. Taemin set down his teacup carefully. There is no price, because we're not interested in selling what you want to buy. What do you mean? Wonshik asked, confused. You want our military? Taemin explained patiently. You want our weapons and our soldiers. You want us to fight your war. But we're not mercenaries. We don't kill for hire. This isn't about hiring soldiers, Jaehi protested. This is about defending civilization itself. About standing together against a common threat. You're right, Taemin said. It is about standing together. That's exactly what we offered you 6 months ago. Do you remember? The room fell silent. Threkvan's mandibles twitched with frustration. That was different. That was before the swarm. No. It wasn't different at all. We offered partnership when times were peaceful. We offered to build relationships, to prepare together for whatever might come. You laughed. You told us we were primitive and worthless. You said to come back in 10,000 years when we might have something of value. We were wrong, Threkvan admitted, his pride crumbling. We were blind and arrogant. I personally mocked you in the Senate chamber. I take full responsibility for that mistake, but please, people are dying. Millions of them. Children, families, entire civilizations. Does our pride matter more than their lives? Taemin stood and walked to his window, looking out over the colony. When we left the Senate that day, we had a choice. We could stay and keep begging for acceptance, keep proving ourselves, keep hoping that eventually you would see our worth. Or we could leave. We could come home and build something for ourselves. And you chose to abandon the galaxy, Wunshik said bitterly. No. Taemin turned back to face them. We chose to respect ourselves. For 300 years, we tried to join your civilization. We learned your languages. We studied your customs. We adapted ourselves to fit your expectations. And still, you looked at us as primitives, as children, as servants who should be grateful for any scraps of attention you threw our way. He moved back to his desk, his voice remaining calm but firm. We realized something important after that Senate vote. We don't need your approval. We don't need your technology or your wisdom. We're perfectly capable of building our own civilization, on our own terms, at our own pace. So you'll just let us die? Jaehi's melodious voice cracked with emotion. You'll sit here in safety while the swarm consumes everyone else? We're not letting you do anything. Taemin replied. Your survival is your responsibility, not ours. Just as our survival has always been our responsibility. We've been fighting to survive since we climbed down from trees 1,000,000 years ago. We fought ice ages and plagues and wars against ourselves. We learned to thrive on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. And we did it all without help from anyone. Threkvan slammed his claws on the desk. This is madness. You have the weapons we need. You know how to fight the swarm. And you're choosing to withhold that knowledge out of spite? Not spite, Taemin said quietly. Self-preservation. Admiral, what happens if we help you? We send our soldiers to die in your wars. We share our weapons technology. We integrate our military with yours. And when the swarm is defeated, what then? Do you think the galaxy will suddenly respect us? Or will we go back to being the primitive species that got lucky with crude weapons? No one answered. We'll be expected to serve, Taemin continued, to patrol your borders, to fight your battles, to be the soldiers you deploy when you don't want to risk your own people. We'll be valuable, but we still won't be equals. We'll be tools, useful tools, but tools nonetheless. You don't know that, Jaehi whispered. Don't I? Taemin asked. You spent 6 months not noticing we were gone. 6 months where you adapted to our absence, found new suppliers, rerouted patrols, and generally continued with your lives. We weren't important to you until you needed something we had. That's not partnership. That's convenience. The delegation sat in defeated silence. They had come with apologies and offers, prepared to negotiate and compromise. They hadn't expected simple refusal. They hadn't imagined humanity would choose isolation over engagement. even in the face of galactic catastrophe. Taemin's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. Truly, I am. I take no pleasure in your suffering. But we warned you this might happen. We offered cooperation when it could have been built on mutual respect. You chose mockery instead. Now you want cooperation built on desperation. We're choosing dignity over utility. So that's it? Threkvan asked hollowly. You'll just watch us burn? We'll watch you fight. Taemin corrected. And learn. And hopefully survive. The same way we've always had to do. Taemin. The delegation left Nova Sol that evening. Their ship lifted off under a sunset that painted the sky in orange and purple. Behind them, the human colony continued its peaceful existence, untouched by the chaos consuming the rest of the galaxy. They had their answer, and it was final. The war against the swarm lasted 3 years and 4 months. In that time, the galactic map was redrawn in blood and ash. 47 worlds burned completely, their biospheres consumed down to bedrock. Another 132 worlds were partially infected, requiring centuries of cleanup before they could support life again. The Celestine Empire lost half its territory. Their elegant cities, which had stood for millennia, were torn apart by swarm organisms that learned to dissolve their crystalline architecture. Their long-lived citizens, who had considered themselves wise beyond measure, died by the billions. The survivors retreated to core worlds and built walls both physical and mental. The Valorian fleets were reduced to 30% of their original strength. Admiral Threkvan died in the Battle of Crimson Nebula, his flagship torn apart by swarm bioships. His replacement was a younger officer who had never known peace, who grew up thinking of war as the natural state of existence. The Krellian Dominion made a separate peace with the swarm in the second year. They ceded 12 border worlds completely, evacuating populations and allowing the swarm to consume them without resistance. The agreement bought them safety at the cost of honor. Other species judged them harshly, but secretly envied their survival. The galaxy learned to fight through trial and error. They developed weapons that combined energy and kinetic force. They created biological warfare that attacked multiple vectors simultaneously, forcing the swarm to choose which adaptations to prioritize. They learned to fight with persistence rather than elegance, grinding down swarm forces through sheer determined effort. It worked, eventually. The swarm's expansion slowed. Its forces were pushed back from core worlds. Infected planets were quarantined and left to starve as supply lines were cut. The galaxy paid for every victory with ships and lives, but slowly, painfully, they won. During all of this, human space remained untouched. The swarm sent one probing force towards Sol's system, in the war's second year. 13 bioships carrying millions of swarm organisms dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were met by a human defense fleet that had been waiting patiently. The battle lasted 6 hours. Human ships launched missile after missile, simple chemical rockets carrying nuclear warheads and kinetic penetrators. The swarm tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. The missiles didn't rely on sophisticated technology, they just exploded with overwhelming force. The bioships tried to release their spore pods toward the inner planets. Human point defense systems intercepted them, simple, automated guns firing solid slugs at high velocity. The pods were shredded before they could reach atmosphere. When the battle ended, all 13 bioships were destroyed. The human fleet had lost 3 vessels, damaged but repairable. The swarm never attempted that direction again. Apparently, even a biological weapon could learn to avoid targets that weren't worth the cost. The galaxy watched this battle through long-range sensors. They noted the human tactics, the simple effectiveness of weapons they had once mocked. Some military analysts wrote papers about it, suggesting their own forces adopt similar approaches. Most ignored these suggestions. Pride dies hard, even when survival demands it. 10 years after the Senate vote that rejected humanity's proposal, a new generation took power across the galaxy. These were beings who had fought the swarm directly, who had seen their worlds burn and their fleets shatter. They had no patience for the old prejudices and comfortable assumptions. Hyjin became a senior senator for the Celestine Empire. She had survived the war by staying mobile, moving from station to station, continuing her research even as everything collapsed around her. Her studies of the swarm had helped develop some of the effective countermeasures. She was respected now, her voice carrying weight in Senate debates. She proposed a new resolution on a quiet morning when the Senate chamber was still being rebuilt. Much of Centris Prime had been damaged in a swarm raid 3 years earlier. The repairs continued slowly, hampered by resource shortages and economic collapse. "We need to address our relationship with humanity," Hyjin began. "Not because we need their military, not because we want something from them, but because we owe them an apology and acknowledgement of our mistakes." The chamber, half full with representatives from surviving civilizations, listened carefully. These senators had learned humility through suffering. They understood that pride was expensive. 10 years ago, humanity offered us partnership. They offered to share their knowledge, their culture, and their commitment to common defense. We laughed at them. We mocked their technology and dismissed their potential. We were wrong. No one argued. The evidence was overwhelming. Human weapons had proven effective where advanced technology failed. Human persistence matched the challenges of fighting an adaptive enemy. The galaxy had learned these lessons at terrible cost. I propose we send a formal apology to Earth. No demands. No requests for assistance. Just acknowledgement that we failed to see their value and that we regret our blindness. The vote was unanimous. Every species that still maintained Senate representation voted in favor. The resolution was drafted carefully, each word chosen to convey genuine regret without asking for anything in return. The message was transmitted to Earth through all available channels. It took 3 days to compose and 30 seconds to send. Then came the waiting. 6 months passed before a response arrived. In that time, the galaxy continued its slow recovery. Trade routes were re-established. Refugee populations were resettled. The massive work of rebuilding began, hampered by the knowledge that another swarm appearance might come at any time. The response came from Earth's Secretary of External Affairs, Taman himself. He had been promoted after returning home, his careful handling of the Senate rejection viewed as diplomatic success rather than failure. His message was brief. The people of Earth acknowledge the Galactic Senate's message and appreciate the sentiments expressed. We understand the challenges you faced and respect the courage required to admit mistakes. We will consider opening diplomatic channels in the future. Until then, we wish all civilized species well in their recovery efforts. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't hatred either. It was something more complex, a measured response that left doors closed but not locked. The galaxy could interpret it as they wished. But the message was clear. Humanity would make decisions in its own time, on its own terms. Hyjin read the response in her office, overlooking the damaged cityscape of Centris Prime. She thought of Sumin, her human friend, who had left so quietly years ago. She wondered if they would ever speak again. If the friendship they had built could survive the gap that politics had created. She drafted a personal message, separate from any official communication. "I'm sorry for what happened. I hope you're well. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here." The message was sent to Sumin's last known address. No response came, but the communication system didn't report it as undeliverable. Someone, somewhere, had received it. That would have to be enough. Across the galaxy, similar personal messages traveled through communication networks. Scientists, who had worked with human colleagues, sent quiet greetings. Military officers who had admired human determination reached out with respect. Individuals who had seen past species differences tried to rebuild connections their governments had broken. Most received no response. A few got brief acknowledgments. But the messages kept coming. A slow trickle of personal contact that bypassed official channels. On Earth and in human colonies, life continued peacefully. The swarm war had been watched carefully, lessons learned, and filed away. Human military forces developed new tactics based on observed swarm behavior. Scientists studied the biological data that leaked through intelligence networks. The galaxy's pain became humanity's education. 15 years after the Senate rejection, human exploration ships began charting new regions of space. Not the old galactic territories, but wild space beyond known boundaries. They found new worlds, established new colonies, pushed outward into regions where no other species had ventured. They built their civilization without asking permission or seeking approval. They helped each other, traded with each other, defended each other, and the sense of community that the galaxy had denied them, they created for themselves. Some younger humans asked why they didn't rejoin galactic civilization now that apologies had been offered. The older generation, those who remembered the Senate chamber's laughter, explained patiently, it wasn't about holding grudges. It was about self-respect. They didn't want us when we needed them, a teacher explained to her students on Nova Sol. Now we don't need them. Maybe someday we'll want to interact as equals, but that day isn't today. Today, we build our own future. In his office on Earth, Taemin reviewed reports from frontier colonies and smiled. Humanity was thriving, not despite their isolation, but because of it. They had learned to depend on themselves, to value their own judgment, to take pride in their achievements without seeking external validation. The galaxy had taught them a lesson they would never forget, and in learning it, they had become stronger than they could have imagined. Outside his window, Earth turned in comfortable silence. 8 billion people, living free from the galaxy's expectations and judgments. They would reach out again someday, when they were ready. When they could meet other species as true equals, rather than supplicants. But that day would come on humanity's schedule, not the galaxy's. The Galactic Senate had laughed once. They wouldn't make that mistake again, and humanity would make sure of it by being patient, strong, and completely comfortable standing alone.